The Nexus Combat Academy orbited the gas giant HFY like a metallic moon, its gleaming corridors housing the galaxy's most prestigious military training facility. Here, the finest warrior specimens from 47 different species learned the art of civilized warfare, a term that would have made any human laugh, had they bothered to ask one. Which, naturally, they hadn't. High Instructor Zephyr, a towering Velthari with skin like polished obsidian and entirely too much confidence in his pedagogical methods, surveyed his latest batch of cadets with the satisfaction of someone who believed the universe operated according to his lesson plans. The Academy's reputation was built on producing warriors who could kill with precision, honor, and most importantly, predictable adherence to established combat protocols. Then Marcus Chen had arrived. The human exchange student sat in the back row of advanced combat theory, seemingly more interested in some primitive handheld device than in Zephyr's discourse on the 17 classical forms of blade work. His presence was part of some diplomatic initiative, something about cultural exchange and interspecies understanding. The kind of bureaucratic nonsense that made seasoned instructors wonder if the Galactic Senate had too much time on their collective hands. The Draknari Mothek fighting style, Zephyr intoned, his forearms gracefully demonstrating a complex defensive pattern, represents the pinnacle of honorable combat. Notice how each movement flows from ancient tradition, refined over millennia of noble warfare. Crix, an insectoid Jepti whose chitinous exoskeleton clicked with nervous energy, raised one of his 6 arms. Instructor, what about human combat methods? A ripple of barely suppressed laughter ran through the classroom. Even Thane, whose crystalline silvery physiology made emotional expression difficult, managed what passed for a smirk. Zephyr's expression suggested he'd been asked to comment on the tactical applications of finger painting. Human combat methods, Cadet Crix, are primitive, crude. They rely on unpredictability rather than skill, chaos rather than honor. Hardly worthy of study in a facility of this caliber. Marcus looked up from his device, some archaic oath entertainment called a smartphone, and offered the kind of smile that should have served as a warning to anyone with functioning survival instincts. Primitive. Huh? That's one way to put it. If the Academy's instructors had possessed any real understanding of human psychology, they might have recognized that particular tone. It was the same one used by apex predators just before they reminded their prey exactly where they sat on the food chain. But the instructors were busy being sophisticated, which left little room for actual wisdom. The classroom's attention shifted to the human, and Marcus seemed to shrink under their collective gaze, a performance that would have impressed any oath-based actor. I mean, you're probably right. We're just a bunch of hairless apes who figured out how to swing sticks, right? The self-deprecating comment drew actual laughter this time, and Zephyr felt his pedagogical authority reassert itself. Indeed, human warfare lacks the philosophical depth and tactical sophistication of more evolved species. Absolutely, Marcus agreed, his tone so earnest it bordered on parody. We definitely don't have thousands of years of experience finding creative ways to kill each other. That would be crazy. In the 4th row, Vex'thul Morkane's reptilian features twisted into what his species considered an expression of contempt. The Draknari warrior caste elite had been born into a culture that viewed combat as the highest art form, where honor was measured in the elegance of one's killing technique. His scaled hide bore ritual scarification indicating victories over 17 different opponents, each kill executed according to the sacred protocols of his ancestors. The human's casual dismissal of Draknari combat superiority struck Vex'thul as more than ignorant. It was insulting. That this soft, pink creature would dare occupy the same learning space as a noble warrior was bad enough. That it would mock the very foundations of civilized combat was intolerable. Perhaps, Vex'thul's voice carried the kind of menace that made smaller species check their life insurance policies. The human would care to demonstrate these primitive methods? I would be honored to provide instruction in proper technique. The classroom fell silent with the particular quality of quiet that preceded either violence or entertainment, and sometimes both. Marcus looked up from his phone with the expression of someone who'd just been offered exactly what he'd been hoping for. You want to fight me? Marcus asked, as if the concept required careful consideration. Like, actually fight. Vex'thul's tongue flicked out to taste the air, a Draknari gesture indicating growing aggression. A formal duel. Supervised? Naturally. It would be educational. High Instructor HFY found himself in the uncomfortable position of watching his carefully structured lesson plan dissolve into what humans would have recognized as a playground challenge. Protocol demanded he intervene, but curiosity about the inevitable outcome made him hesitate just long enough for Marcus to respond. "Sure," the human said with a shrug that somehow managed to be both casual and provocative. "Sounds fun." If HFY had been human, he would have recognized the expression that crossed Marcus's face as the look of someone who'd just been handed an early Christmas present. Instead, he saw what appeared to be nervous acceptance of an impossible challenge, and found himself oddly pleased at the educational opportunity this would provide. The Academy's dueling protocols hadn't been designed with humans in mind, largely because no one had expected them to survive long enough to require formal combat procedures. The standard arena was a circular space 50 meters in diameter, surrounded by energy barriers and monitored by medical personnel trained in 46 different species anatomies. Human anatomy, being both recent and presumed irrelevant, had been added as an afterthought. Dr. Yilnora, the Academy's chief medical officer, reviewed her hastily downloaded human physiology texts with the dedication of someone trying to learn emergency surgery from a pamphlet. Her aquatic Nordelian features rippled with concern as she studied the bizarre inefficiency of human biological design. "Single heart," she muttered, her translator rendering her aquatic vocalizations into standard Galactic. "Rigid skeletal structure. No redundant organ systems. How did these creatures survive their home planet?" The betting pools had opened within hours of the challenge being formalized, and the odds heavily favored Vex'thul. Draknari physiology was impressive even by galactic standards: enhanced strength, natural armor, reflexes honed by millions of years of evolution on a death world where the plants tried to eat you. Marcus Chen was, by comparison, a mobile collection of evolutionary compromises held together by optimism and caffeine. Thane, whose crystalline thought processes operated on mathematical principles, calculated the human's survival chances at approximately 0.003%. "The Draknari will end this quickly," he informed his fellow students with characteristic Silmery directness. Prolonging the encounter would be unnecessarily cruel. Duel, an aquatic Fentai whose species had achieved interstellar travel without ever developing land-based warfare, found the entire situation fascinating from an anthropological perspective. But why would the human accept? Surely it understands the physiological disadvantages. Crix's compound eyes tracked Marcus as the human performed what appeared to be pre-combat preparation, which mostly involved consuming various oath-based foodstuffs and watching something on his primitive device. Perhaps it doesn't understand. Human intelligence may be overrated. They were wrong, of course, but being wrong with confidence is a galactic tradition older than faster-than-light travel. Marcus spent the 3 days before the duel in activities that baffled his fellow students and concerned the instructors. While Vex'thul engaged in elaborate meditation rituals and practiced increasingly complex combat forms, Marcus watched what appeared to be historical Earth documentaries about something called mixed martial arts and consumed alarming quantities of what his food synthesizer labeled as pizza. High Instructor HFY made several attempts to counsel the human out of the engagement, driven partly by pedagogical responsibility and partly by the uncomfortable realization that having a student killed in a formal duel might reflect poorly on his teaching evaluations. "Marcus," HFY said, his tone carrying the patience of someone explaining basic mathematics to a particularly slow child, "Vex'thul has trained in combat since hatching. His species has evolved for warfare. This encounter will not end favorably for you." Marcus looked up from what appeared to be an oath film involving humans hitting each other with chairs, and his expression carried the kind of thoughtfulness that should have served as a warning. "You know, instructor, that's probably true. Draknari are pretty impressive physical specimens." "Indeed. Perhaps we could arrange a different form of competition? Academic, perhaps." "Nah," Marcus said, returning his attention to the screen where 2 humans were engaging in combat that violated approximately 37 articles of the Galactic Convention on Civilized Warfare. "I think this will work out fine." The morning of the duel arrived with the sort of fanfare typically reserved for academic exercises that everyone expected to end quickly. The arena's observation decks filled with students and faculty eager to witness what promised to be a brief but educational demonstration of interspecies combat dynamics. Vex'thul entered the arena with ceremony appropriate to his status, his ritual combat gear gleaming under the artificial lighting. Traditional Draknari dueling attire included articulated armor plates that enhanced natural protection, while allowing full mobility, ceremonial weapons that had been handed down through generations, and scarification that told the story of previous victories. Marcus entered the arena wearing what appeared to be casual Louth clothing and carrying no visible weapons. "Where is the human's equipment?" Dr. Yilnaro asked, her medical senses already focused on what she assumed would soon be a patient requiring extensive reconstructive surgery. High Instructor Zephyr consulted his notes on human combat traditions, which were admittedly brief. Perhaps this represents some form of psychological warfare? Earth military history suggests they occasionally engaged in unconventional tactics. The formal preliminaries were conducted according to Academy protocol, with both combatants acknowledging the rules of engagement. Supervised combat, no lethal force, victory achieved through submission or incapacitation. Standard civilized warfare, as practiced by mature species who had evolved beyond primitive brutality. Vex'thul's opening attack was a masterpiece of Draknari combat art, a fluid combination of strikes designed to demonstrate superior technique while quickly ending the encounter. His movements flowed from one form to another with the grace of someone who had trained since childhood, each technique executed with precision that would have earned approval from his ancestors. Marcus absorbed the attack with the sort of passive defense that made spectators wince in sympathetic pain. The humans seemed to lack any coherent defensive strategy, taking hits that would have crippled members of more fragile species. He stumbled backward, arms raised in what appeared to be desperate attempts at protection rather than skillful blocking. "Poor creature," Duel whispered, her aquatic features rippling with sympathy. "It's completely outclassed." For the first several minutes of the encounter, everything proceeded exactly as predicted. Vex'thul demonstrated superior technique, physical capability, and tactical understanding. Marcus demonstrated an impressive capacity for absorbing punishment while accomplishing very little in return. The betting pools prepared for quick resolution, and Dr. Yilnaro readied her medical equipment for what promised to be an interesting xenobiological challenge. Then something changed. It started subtly. Marcus's defensive movements became slightly more purposeful, his positioning marginally more strategic. He began moving in ways that seemed random, but consistently placed obstacles between himself and Vex'thul's attacks. When the Draknari warrior executed a perfect textbook combination, Marcus responded with something that wasn't in any textbook. He grabbed a handful of arena sand and flung it directly into Vex'thul's eyes. The collective gasp from the observation deck carried undertones of shock and moral outrage. Sand throwing violated approximately 17 different conventions of honorable combat, represented a complete abandonment of civilized fighting principles, and was exactly the sort of primitive behavior everyone expected from humans. It was also devastatingly effective. While Vex'thul clawed at his eyes, Marcus executed what Earth military manuals would have classified as a tactical advance to the rear, which was a polite way of saying he ran like hell while his opponent was temporarily blinded. But he didn't retreat to safety. He used the respite to reposition, circling around to attack from an unexpected angle. "This is highly irregular," High Instructor Zephyr announced, though he found himself leaning forward with unexpected interest. Combat doctrine clearly states that environmental factors should not be weaponized in formal dueling. "I don't think the human received that memo," Crix observed, his compound eyes tracking Marcus's movements with new attention. What happened next would require the Academy to revise several sections of their tactical instruction manuals. Marcus's approach to combat, it turned out, wasn't bound by concepts like honor or established technique or fighting fair. When Vex'thul cleared his vision and resumed his attack, Marcus responded by doing something no Draknari warrior had ever encountered. He grabbed the nearest piece of arena equipment and used it as an improvised weapon. The Draknari combat forms had been refined over millennia to counter every known fighting style in the galaxy. They had not been designed to deal with opponents who would grab the arena's hydration station and swing it like a club. Vex'thul's attempt to execute a classical defensive pattern against what was essentially a water cooler resulted in the sort of tactical confusion that military historians would later study with fascination. The hydration station connected with his armor with a sound that made several spectators physically wince, and the proud Draknari warrior found himself introduced to a human concept called getting your bell rung. Is that legal? Thane asked, his crystalline thought processes struggling to categorize what he was witnessing. I'm not sure our legal framework anticipated this scenario, Zephyr admitted, consulting his instructor's manual with growing desperation. Marcus, meanwhile, had discovered that arena equipment was surprisingly versatile when viewed through the lens of creative violence. The hydration station was followed by a lighting fixture, which was followed by a piece of decorative architecture that had seemed permanently attached to the floor until Marcus decided it wasn't. Vex'thul's training had prepared him for opponents who would attack with skill, precision, and adherence to recognized combat principles. It had not prepared him for someone who would tear a bench loose from its moorings and use it as a battering ram. The psychological impact was immediate and devastating. Draknari combat philosophy was built on predictable patterns of attack and response, unbound exchanges that followed ancient protocols. Marcus's approach was like trying to have a formal debate with someone who responded to logical arguments by throwing furniture. This is not combat, Vex'thul snarled, his dignity as battered as his armor. This is barbarism. Marcus paused his systematic destruction of arena furniture long enough to offer a response that would be quoted in tactical instruction manuals for decades to come. Yeah, probably. You want to quit. The invitation to surrender was delivered while Marcus held what had previously been an ornamental pillar, and Vex'thul's response was a wordless roar of rage that carried undertones of existential crisis. The proud Draknari warrior charged forward with the desperation of someone whose entire worldview was being demolished along with the arena fixtures. What followed was a masterclass in the difference between fighting and warfare. Vex'thul fought like a warrior, skilled, honorable, bound by traditions that elevated combat to an art form. Marcus fought like a human, doughty, creative, and utterly unconcerned with anyone's opinion of his methods. When Vex'thul executed perfect technique, Marcus responded with perfect pragmatism. When the Draknari attempted to restore honor to the encounter, Marcus introduced him to concepts like eye gouging and joint manipulation and biting. The spectators watched in horrified fascination as their understanding of combat was systematically deconstructed. Dr. Yilnara found herself taking notes on human combat psychology while simultaneously preparing to treat injuries that didn't exist in any of her medical texts. His targeting nerve clusters, she observed with professional interest, and pressure points that shouldn't even be accessible through Draknari armor. How does he know their anatomy? The answer, had anyone bothered to check Marcus's academic records, lay in his minor studies in xenobiology. The human hadn't spent 3 days watching Oath combat footage for entertainment. He'd been conducting research. Vex'thul's realization that his opponent had systematically studied Draknari physiological weaknesses came at roughly the same moment Marcus demonstrated practical applications of that knowledge. The proud warrior's roar of challenge became a much less dignified sound when Marcus applied precise pressure to neural pathways that the Draknari equivalent of anatomy textbooks claimed were protected by natural armor. Impossible, Vex'thul gasped, his warrior's training warring with a distinctly non-theoretical pain radiating from body parts that weren't supposed to be vulnerable. Those pressure points are anatomically shielded. Marcus's response carried the tone of someone explaining a particularly obverse concept to a slow student. Yeah, from the outside. Different story when you approach from angles your armor wasn't designed to protect. The human's tactical approach shifted again, this time from environmental improvisation to what Earth military doctrine classified as psychological operations. Marcus began talking. You know what's interesting about Draknari combat forms? Marcus asked conversationally while systematically dismantling Vex'thul's defensive patterns. They are really beautiful, artistic, even. Very impressive to watch. Vex'thul's response was interrupted by Marcus's application of what appeared to be a wrestling technique that hadn't been seen in civilized combat for several centuries. Problem is, Marcus continued, his tone remaining educational despite the violence, they are designed for opponents who fight the same way. Very specialized. Not much adaptability built into the system. The observation was punctuated by Marcus demonstrating another human innovation, the strategic use of momentum and leverage to overcome superior physical strength. Vex'thul found himself airborne in a manner that violated several principles of Draknari physics, followed by an introduction to arena flooring that his armor absorbed imperfectly. See, humans had to fight everybody, Marcus explained while Vex'thul struggled to regain his footing. Different species, different environments, different rules. We got pretty good at adapting. The educational monologue continued as Marcus systematically worked through what appeared to be a mental checklist of human combat innovations. Joint locks that exploited biomechanical weaknesses. Pressure point manipulation that bypassed natural armor. Psychological tactics designed to disrupt enemy morale and decision-making processes. By the time Marcus introduced Vex'thul to the human concept of ground fighting, the Draknari warrior's worldview had been thoroughly revised. The elegant combat forms of his ancestors, it turned out, were significantly less effective when your opponent was willing to grab whatever body part presented itself and twist until something made an unpleasant sound. This is not honorable combat. Vex'thul protested from a position that human wrestlers would have recognized as thoroughly screwed. No, Marcus agreed cheerfully, this is effective combat. Different thing entirely. The end came with a sort of practical finality that would have made Sun Tzu proud. Vex'thul, trapped in a submission hold that exploited 3 different anatomical vulnerabilities simultaneously, faced a choice between surrender and explaining to Dr. Yilnora how several of his appendages had been relocated to non-standard positions. Yield, he gasped, the word carrying the weight of cultural trauma. Marcus released the hold immediately and helped the battered Draknari to his feet with a sort of casual courtesy that somehow made the defeat even more humiliating. Good fight, he said, as if the systematic deconstruction of millennial-old combat traditions was just another day at the office. The arena fell silent except for the sound of Dr. Yilnora's medical scanners working overtime. Vex'thul's injuries, while extensive, were primarily to his pride and his understanding of how the universe worked. His physical damage was surprisingly minimal. Marcus had demonstrated remarkable precision in applying just enough force to achieve tactical objectives without causing permanent harm. 17 separate joint dislocations, Dr. Yilnora announced to the medical team with professional fascination. Temporary neural disruption in 12 different locations. Severe bruising to ego and cultural identity. And somehow, no life-threatening injuries despite combat that violated every principle of civilized warfare. High instructor HFY stared at his notes on human combat capabilities, which would require complete revision. How? He asked, addressing the question to Marcus as much as to the universe in general. Marcus shrugged, the gesture carrying the same casual dismissal that had started the entire encounter. You guys fight like it's a dance. All rhythm and predetermined steps. Humans fight like it's a problem that needs solving, and we're pretty good at problem solving. The observation hung in the air, while the Academy's finest minds grappled with implications that would reshape their understanding of combat theory. The human hadn't won through superior technique or physical capability. He'd won by refusing to accept the rules that limited everyone else's tactical options. Crix's compound eyes tracked Marcus as the human collected his primitive communication device and prepared to leave. But the Dishina, the insectoid, protested. The violation of combat protocols. The complete disregard for civilized warfare principles. Marcus paused at the arena exit, his expression carrying the kind of patience typically reserved for explaining complex concepts to children. You want to know something about human military history? We've been doing civilized warfare for thousands of years. Treaties, rules of engagement, conventions about acceptable conduct. Very sophisticated stuff. He gestured toward Vex'thul, who was being helped from the arena by medical personnel, while muttering what sounded like prayers to his ancestors. But when push comes to shove, when survival is on the line, we remember that civilized is just a word we use to make ourselves feel better about organized violence. The human smile carried undertones that made several species check their diplomatic relationships with Earth. War isn't civilized. It's not honorable. It's not fair. It's just something that needs to be won, and humans are really, really good at winning. Marcus left the arena to the sound of his fellow students engaging in the kind of urgent whispered conversations that typically preceded major revisions to established doctrine. High instructor Zephyr found himself staring at his lesson plans with a growing realization that his next lecture on primitive human combat methods would require substantial updates. In the medical bay, Dr. Yilnora worked with her team to restore Vex'thul's various displaced appendages, while the Draknari warrior stared at the ceiling with the expression of someone whose fundamental assumptions about reality had been forcibly adjusted. "The humans studied us," Vex'thul said finally, his voice carrying wonder and horror in equal measure. "Not our combat forms or our traditions. Our weaknesses. Our vulnerabilities." It approached the duel like a biological puzzle to be solved rather than an honorable contest to be won. Dr. Yilnora's aquatic features rippled with what her species considered thoughtful consideration. Perhaps that says something about human intelligence that we haven't fully appreciated. The Academy's betting pools settled accounts with the sort of mathematical precision that made several students very wealthy and left others reconsidering their career choices and risk assessment. The official records would list the encounter as human victory by opponent submission, but the unofficial discussions would continue for years. 3 days later, enrollment applications from human military academies began arriving at the Nexus Combat Academy with unprecedented frequency. The applications uniformly requested cultural exchange programs and interspecies combat training opportunities, language that made High Instructor Zephyr profoundly uncomfortable. Marcus Chen, meanwhile, returned to his regular classes with a sort of casual attitude that suggested nothing particularly noteworthy had occurred. His fellow students treated him with a combination of respect, wariness, and the kind of careful courtesy typically reserved for unexploded ordnance. When Zephyr resumed his lectures on advanced combat theory, he found himself making subtle but significant revisions to his curriculum. The section on primitive human warfare was quietly expanded into a full semester course on unconventional tactical applications, and his discussion of Draknari combat superiority acquired several important footnotes about adaptability and tactical flexibility. The galaxy's understanding of human military capabilities, it seemed, had been based on incomplete information. The discovery that Earth's species approached warfare with the same innovative problem-solving that had carried them to the stars suggested that previous assessments of human strategic potential might require adjustment. In his final report on the incident, High Instructor Zephyr wrote, "Human combat doctrine appears to prioritize practical effectiveness over aesthetic consideration or traditional honor. While this approach violates numerous principles of civilized warfare, its tactical applications demonstrate unexpected sophistication. Recommend expanded study of human military psychology and strategic thinking." The report's classified addendum noted, "Suggest diplomatic review of current human territorial restrictions and military technology sharing agreements. Species that views combat as an engineering problem may possess strategic capabilities not adequately reflected in existing threat assessments." Marcus Chen's academic records showed steady improvement in all subjects, with particular excellence in xenobiology and what the Academy catalog listed as creative problem-solving in high-stress environments. His instructors noted that he demonstrated unusual aptitude for identifying systemic vulnerabilities in established doctrines, though they were careful to phrase this as an academic strength rather than a security concern. The Nexus Combat Academy continued its mission of producing the galaxy's finest warriors, but with a new appreciation for the difference between fighting and warfare. Students learned traditional combat forms with the same dedication as always, but they also studied case histories of asymmetric conflicts and the tactical applications of unconventional thinking. Vex'thul Morcaine eventually recovered from his injuries, both physical and psychological, though his approach to combat was forever changed. His post-graduation military service included several commendations for innovative tactical thinking and an unusual willingness to adapt established doctrine to unexpected circumstances. He never spoke publicly about his duel with Marcus Chen, but his private journals contained extensive notes on human military psychology and the strategic value of intellectual flexibility. The galaxy's military academies quietly began recruiting human instructors for courses on alternative combat methodologies and practical applications of asymmetric warfare. Earth's diplomatic status was subtly revised to reflect what policy analysts carefully termed enhanced strategic partnership potential. Marcus Chen graduated with honors and accepted a position with the Galactic Defense Corps, where his personnel file noted exceptional capability in conflict resolution through innovative tactical applications. His first assignment involved a border dispute with a species known for their adherence to traditional military doctrine and their complete confidence in the superiority of established combat methods. The conflict ended 3 days after Marcus's arrival, though the official records were classified at levels that suggested the resolution had involved methods not typically covered in diplomatic training manuals. Years later, when xenobiologists studied the intersection of human military doctrine and interspecies relations, they would note that Earth's rapid integration into galactic civilization coincided with a galaxy-wide reassessment of what constituted effective military strategy. The correlation was considered academically interesting but politically sensitive, leading to research classifications that ensured the subject remained safely theoretical. The Nexus Combat Academy still teaches the classical combat forms, still emphasizes the importance of honor and tradition in warfare. But embedded in the curriculum, woven through lessons on tactical theory and strategic thinking, is a new understanding of what happens when civilized warfare encounters species that view conflict as simply another problem requiring creative solutions. High instructors FIR's current students learn about the 17 classical forms of blade work, the philosophical foundations of honorable combat, and the tactical applications of environmental adaptation. They study the great military traditions of 47 different species, each with their own approaches to organized violence and structured conflict. They also learn about humans, and the day a single exchange student reminded the galaxy that in the end, war isn't about honor or tradition or civilized conduct. It's about solving problems, and some species are just naturally better at finding solutions that others hadn't considered. The Academy's motto, carved in 17 different languages above the main entrance, reads, "Through honor, victory." A more recent edition, installed quietly after the Chen incident and visible only to those who know where to look, carries a different message in a language that most species are still learning to understand, through victory, peace. It's signed with a simple notation that human military historians would recognize as a reference to one of Earth's oldest strategic principles, though the Academy's administrators prefer to think of it as an academic footnote rather than a warning. The galaxy learned many things from Marcus Chen's brief but memorable time at the Nexus Combat Academy. They learned about human adaptability, about the tactical applications of creative thinking, about the difference between fighting as art and fighting as engineering. Most importantly, they learned that when humans say warfare is primitive, they are not apologizing. They are explaining.